It would be absurd if we talked about social movements at the speed of the internet and we didn't talk about the Arab Spring, obviously. The problem is that we've talked already about a lot of the details of the Arab Spring and the back and forth debate about whether or not they were caused by Twitter and social movements, or whether they were aided, or to what extent they were aided by these tools. There's no doubt that technology and the internet played a major role in helping to speed up these revolutions that really moved throughout much of the Arab world. And regardless of whether the internet or to what extent the internet caused them, there are a few really important lessons that can be taken away from the Arab Spring in terms of using social media for political mobilization. First, is the idea that technology doesn't guarantee revolutions, but also neither does poverty or inequality. We have a lot of places throughout the world that have extreme inequality, that have extreme sense of shared grievance, but that does not necessarily lead to revolutions for a number of different reasons. And at the same time, just the fact that people have the internet or have technology and are able to link up with other like-minded people doesn't necessarily guarantee it either. One important way to look at this is to focus on the number of people who actually have access to the internet, what is generally referred to as the penetration rate of the internet. And in 2012, we see that in the Arab Spring, or at least throughout the Middle East, 40% of the Middle East was able to access the internet on a regular basis. That's more than the average around the world, but is clearly far from typical in terms of across-the-board widespread access. We can compare that to other places in the world and you'll see a huge difference. And now back to the Arab Spring and the Middle East. I apologize for those of you who got motion sickness during that last little run around the world here. But it is important to note that penetration rate really matters, but it is not in itself a catalyst, right? It can't cause social movements to happen, but a lack of access can slow opportunities for social movements to be successful. There's no doubt that Egypt was cutting off access because it would make it harder for activists in Egypt to try to continue their protests. So those were one important lesson to take out of the Arab Spring. Second is the idea that the medium can lead the message. The type of medium that you use really affects what sort of messages we're sending out. Those images from 1963 were incredibly powerful. Photographs alone can be enormously powerful. Video can add to that in many respects. And the idea that now we can create it ourselves through smartphones, through cameras, and send it out immediately throughout social media is a really powerful piece. Sometimes it can even take the place of some of the message that they're trying to send. I think that the Occupy movement in some ways fell victim to exactly that. Third, the online crowd dynamics often mimic offline crowd dynamics, meaning that what happens online in terms of sending messages, of having particular individuals or organizations that are more or less influential, that is very similar to what happens in traditional offline mobilization. They're not entirely different. Fourth, the internet facilitates repression as well. We've talked about this already. The power of the state is exactly that. It's the idea that a state, a government, can use the internet to try to repress the messages that a population is receiving, and also the messages that they are able to send out, whether you're talking about China, most notably, Iran, or obviously the United States with recent NSA revelations. A lot can be said for the power of the state in trying to repress subversive or objectionable material being created by or passed around by their citizens. Pressure causes adaptation by activists, meaning that as repression builds, as the status quo as efforts are made to maintain the status quo, often activists are then forced to adapt and modify their techniques. New technology, especially mobile technology, is extremely important in allowing for this to happen much easier. And that's really connected to the next big thing. Much more than internet access, the key here is mobility. That mobility is key for movements, especially movements that are taking place in different places, moving very quickly. Ultimately, mobility and the idea of being able to carry around the internet, carry around your access to the rest of the world in your pocket is really, really important. And we'll see that mobility is only going to continue to grow. That's why areas like Africa that are very low in terms of internet access today, but are increasing very quickly, the majority of those people who are gaining access to the internet in Africa are gaining it on their cell phones. And so they're leapfrogging over a whole generation of technology. They don't necessarily need laptops, they don't have tablets, but they have mobility. And so this is something that we'll need to pay attention to as we start to see how technology and mobility affects parts of the world that had relatively low penetration rates before, like Africa. Finally, governments who stay in control of the internet stay in control of the message. So this is what happened, or what was attempted in places like Egypt, did not happen in other parts of the Middle East. And so ultimately, we see that control by the government is really, really a powerful piece.